If you don't do this as a diabetic, you're gonna have a hard time keeping your blood sugars in control. If it's your first time on the channel, guys, I'm a diabetic fitness coach. I grew up as a type 1 diabetic playing competitive sports. I played hockey, football, soccer, and I also bodybuilding growing up as well. And now I'm a diabetic fitness coach and I help diabetics to control their blood sugars and transform their bodies. But if you're not a diabetic, I also do supplement reviews. So if you like any of that stuff, I do some motivation stuff. Just gonna throw it at you guys. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, hit that like button, hit the bell notification so you guys know when I drop these videos. Insulin to carb ratio just means how much insulin are you going to give yourself to take care of the carbohydrates you eat. So the more we can dial into an insulin to carb ratio, the better our blood sugars are going to be. We're going to feel better. It's going to help us with our workouts, and the list goes on. A lot of times what people will first be given is what's called a sliding scale. These are garbage in the long run, but maybe in the short run, it can help someone kind of get their feet wet. But you really have to dial more into what your specific insulin to carb ratio is so you can handle the carbohydrates that your body eats. Simple way that you guys can do this is you want to, one, be mindful of what you're doing in terms of what you're eating and what it's doing to your blood sugars. Keep in mind that insulin, especially rapid acting insulins that work within 10 to 15 minutes like Humalog and Novolog, they have a peak time of about an hour to an hour and a half, meaning that's when it's at its maximum strength. Now, after that hour to hour and a half, it's still going to be in your system up to about 4 hours, and it can still help to control the blood sugars and bring them down, but its maximum strength is an hour and a half. So what you want to do is pick a day where maybe you don't have a lot going on, and you want to go ahead and 4 hours after your last insulin shot, pick anywhere between about 30 and 45 grams of carbohydrates. Now what you want to do with this is whatever your current insulin to carb ratio is, maybe it's 1 unit accounts for every 10 grams of carbohydrates. You want to test this theory again. So let's say, for example, it's 1 to 10 units and you have 30 grams of carbohydrates. You give yourself 3 units, and again, remember you have to do this after 4 hours, so there's no other short acting, rapid acting from a previous meal in your system. Now, whatever your blood sugar is before you eat, you want that blood sugar to be in and around about 1.7 mmol per liter about 2 to 3 hours after. That means that that insulin to carb ratio, generally speaking, is working for you, because all the insulin to carb ratio is going to handle is the carbohydrates that you're eating. You could run into problems of the dawn phenomenon effect where cortisol levels are higher, and that could contribute to your blood sugar being pushed up if you're running this test in the morning. So do this test in the evening. I would say early evening is the best time to do this test. Maybe you're somebody that you have no idea where to start. You don't have an insulin to carb ratio. Look at where you currently are and divide those numbers by the carbohydrate. Let's say, for example, you typically give yourself 10 units of insulin for 50 grams of carbohydrates. 50 divided by 10, which would be 5. You just divide the carbohydrates by how much units you already give yourself, you'll have a starting point for an insulin to carb ratio. So if you have 50 grams of carbohydrates and your sheet tells you, or whatever tells you, to give yourself 10 units, go 50 divided by 10, and that will give you your insulin to carb ratio. 50 divided by 10 would be 5. Right? So your insulin carb ratio will be 1 unit for every 5 grams of carbohydrates. So if that's already working for you, you could just start with that and then just tweak it along the way to fine tune it. That's how you can use the sliding scale information you already have to start to transfer it to an insulin to carb ratio, which will work a lot better and allow you more flexibility for higher carbohydrates. If you don't have any system at all, right? Typically a good starting point, and just to be on the safe side, because I don't know what your history is, you can start with 1 unit for every 20 grams of carbohydrates and really fast work your way down. Like if you go 1 unit for every 20 grams of carbohydrates, you have 40 grams of carbohydrates. 40 divided by 20 means 2 units. If you go into before your meal running our test, now you have, let's say you have 40 grams of carbohydrates, you give yourself 2 units. Your blood sugar was a 6 before you ate. And then 2 hours and 3 hours later, you're like a 10, 11. We know that that is not aggressive enough. And so what I would do the very next meal you do, or the next day, you're gonna try 1 for every 15 and try that next. And then at a 1 to a 15, you try it again and see if you're going higher, if you're going lower, or maybe you're coming back in around that 1.7 mmol. Then you know you're good with that and you can move forward and fine tune that some more. And that's your insulin to carb ratio. And that's if you're starting at the safe route at about 1 unit for every 20. But you can make adjustments every day to really dial in by the middle of the week to have an insulin to carb ratio that works. If you're somebody that's going from 1 unit for every 20 grams of carbohydrates, then 1 unit for every 15 isn't that much of a jump for the carbohydrates that you eat. Say 50 divided by 20 would be 2.5 units for 50 grams of carbohydrates if we're saying an insulin to carb ratio is 1 unit for every 20. If we say your insulin to carb ratio is 1 unit for every 15, then we do 50 divided by 15 means you take about 3.3 units. So you see 2.5 to 3.3, it's not as crazy, but you're still taking a little bit more. So as you get lower, start getting it around 1 unit for every 8, 1 unit for every 7, try maybe shifting it down by 1 rather than doing a drastic shift from a 1 unit for every 20 grams of carbohydrates to a 1 to every 15. Right? Because the difference you're gonna make up is gonna be crazier. So for example, if someone does 1 unit for every 7, so we go 50 divided by 7 is 7, but let's say we drop and we're like, hey, well, let's just shift it and go 1 unit for every 4. So now we're gonna go 50 divided by 4, that's 12.5 units. So you just went from giving yourself 7 units to giving yourself 12.5 units. So you're essentially giving yourself 5.5 more units just by dropping it by 3 when you get to the lower numbers. Versus if you're dropping it by 5, you're not even a unit off from what you did before. That's how you guys can really dial into your insulin to carb ratio. And the trick is to keep tweaking until you find an insulin to carb ratio that works. Remember that the number should come in and around about 1.7 mmol per liter. If it's a little bit above that, that's okay too. But just keep track of what's happening over time. And then you keep dialing the knob and turning it, lowering the number if you notice you're going high 2 to 3 hours after you eat. And increase the number if you're going low 2 to 3 hours after you eat. Sliding scales are shit over time to get better control. So again, if I'm having something like this, like to give you guys an example, my insulin to carb ratio is about a 1 to a 7 in the evening, and sometimes your insulin to carb ratio can change based on your needs. So you might need a little bit more in the evening when cortisol levels are less, because the circadian rhythm of cortisol is higher in the morning leading into the early afternoon, I find for myself. And so that's when my insulin to carb ratio is 1 to a 5, just because of some of the insulin resistance from the cortisol, which is natural. You might have a lower insulin to carb ratio in the morning and a higher one. Lower meaning 1 to a 5 and then 1 to a 7 in the evening, like what I do. So for example, our person that's on a sliding scale might say, hey, between this, if you have this amount of carbs, have X amount of units of insulin, but you don't even know how you got there. So how do you have flexibility if you're just on a sliding scale? So that's why I love insulin to carb ratios, because I know, for example, pierogies, your boy loves pierogies, but if you have 3 pierogies, it's 32 grams of carbohydrates. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna take my calculator out because I'm not a mathematician. My phone shut off on me, so give me 1 second. Today, Junior, 32 divided by 7, if I have 3 pierogies, I'm getting myself 4.5 units. So again, if I only have this amount of information, obviously if I want 6, I gotta double that. So 3 times 2, and then I would go 32 times 2, for example. And that's just how you would run that. And divide the carbohydrate information by your insulin to carb ratio, whether it's 5, 6, whatever that is, and you guys will be good to go. And that's just how I manage it, and it helps me out, so maybe it might help someone out too. And the trick is always fine tuning it. It's great, everyone has an insulin to carb, well, you might have an insulin to carb ratio, but when's the last time you tweaked it and were mindful of where it is and where the blood sugars are going, for example? And even if you've got a pump that has it on auto setting and it can transfer your blood sugars, spending more time in range by even just having that insulin to carb ratio dialed in more is something that can help out a lot as well. My cat my cat wanted to be part of the shot. She usually likes to hold it, but I had V holding it this time. So she's down there. She's a little frustrated because deep down, she wants to be a videographer. But I just don't feel like she has the grip. She doesn't have the grip strength.